Hey guys, it's AxiomaticUncertainty here, and this is just going to be our next tutorial in the, car series. So I hope you enjoyed the last video. This video is just going to be building on that, but, hope you've been following along, learning something from this, so, yeah, let's get right to it. So, this video, as I said last time, is going to cover the camera, and I've also decided to cover handling, choosing a center of mass location, and I just want this to be a brief tutorial. We're just going to use this as a stepping stone for the next stuff that we do, including some, better functionality for this camera. So let's just get right into it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a new script, and we're going to call this our camera manager. And what this is going to do, just to open it up, is it's going to allow us to manage a variety of aspects of our camera. In particular, though, we're going to be using this to in order to control its movement, and in order to specify various aspects of the behaviors, so the characteristics of like the dampening and the default distances from the vehicle. And then later in the series, we're going to get into things like switching between perspectives, inside of the vehicle, reversed camera, everything like that. So first, I would like to specify a new game object, and we're just going to call this our focus, right? And this is going to be, in this case, our vehicle. So this is the thing on which the camera is going to be focusing at all times. And let's just add a float, and we're going to call this our distance. And let's just say that this is like 3.5, 4, I guess. 4, maybe 5. Let's just try that first. And then we're going to get another float, and we're going to call this our height. We're going to call this 2. And then, yeah, lastly, our dampening. So for this, float, dampening, right? And let's just make this, I don't know, 1 for now, right? So you may be wondering now, like, how is this going to work? Well, I will show you, and it's only going to take us, one line. So, one or maybe a few, I guess, but I don't think so. So, yeah, 2 lines, I would say, because we need, angles and locations. So, what we're going to do here first, right, is we are going to say, transform.position. So, what we're going to do here is transform.position is non-invocable. As I covered in the last tutorial, some methods simply cannot, or some classes simply cannot be invoked, like a function like that. You can't, it's not a method like that. So we're just gonna use this set get, and we're gonna set the value, and let's just make this equal to a lerp. So what we can do here is just say vector3.lerp, and then in here we can specify our condition. So the way that the lerp function works, if you can see it here, is that our lerp function, as this says here, is a linear interpolation function. So essentially, when you linearly interpolate between two things, you can, well, in this case at least, in this instance, you are starting with 3 things. So you're going to start with a starting value, right, like this, a b, and then a t, where a is the location of your object at the start, b is the location to which you're moving, and t is a time frame. So, if we wanted to take it, or want it to take 1 second, we can say time dot delta time, right, just like that. And now it'll take, 1 second for, or approximately 1 second for the transform to reach B from A, right? So every second it'll update, you know, it'll keep moving a little bit closer, just stepping. So essentially, we can just continually step from between objects at, you know, some rate, and that's given by, you know, this distance divided by the total time, and then that's our, you know, or this displacement divided by the time, and that's our, you know, velocity vector. So I hope that that makes some sense. Now for our starting location, obviously it's just going to be our transform top position, our current value that is, and then for this B value, so this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Now the first value is just going to be our focus.transform.position, right? And actually here, so to start off, I will just run this and show you what happens. So, whoops, actually, here, give me a sec. So we need to first add this camera manager here, right? And you can see we have this game object, so we're going to drag the car in. And it should just reach the center of the car immediately. So you can see, yeah, so we've interpolated straight into this vehicle's interior. Right, and it's very smooth because as we get closer, our distance decreases, and so, as I said earlier, since we're just doing our total displacement vector divided by time, we're going to get a velocity vector which decreases as it moves closer, and so we're going to get that nice smooth effect there that you just saw. So, what are we going to do now? Well, we can offset this, so if we really want to, and we do, we can now create a new vector 3, and we're going to specify some stuff in here. So on the x-axis, we're going to have 0, right, because we don't want it shifted left or right of the car. And then on the y-axis, it's going to be our height, right, just like that. And then on our z-axis, you might say, oh, well, let's make it, you know, distance, right? But this also has to be our negative distance because we are behind the car on the z-axis. And actually, one more thing here, which is that we need this. So this is 3D. This is just like non-relative space. So this is our absolute space, in that, like, if you look at this coordinate system, this is absolute space. But if the car changes directions, we still want to be behind the car by those offset values. So what we need to do is we actually need to grab our focus dot transform dot position, right? And then we can say, actually, is it, I don't remember if it's under position or not, but it's transform dot oh my gosh, I'm having a little bit of a blank here on this. Yeah, this is it, I think. Yes, okay, perfect. I'm sorry, I almost forgot that for a second. So there we go. So what this is going to do for us is that we can now, it'll allow us to essentially just transform these values, as I said, so that this vector, right, which starts out here, can be brought, we're essentially going to treat this as if it was within this car's coordinate system, where the car's direction defines both our origin and our, you know, axes. So now this should fix everything with that, and if we just save this, I know it's not finished yet, but if we save it, we should see, yeah, so as you can see, we're now, and the car isn't going to stay in frame, but if I just look at this camera here, you can see that as I sort of drag this car around, right, the camera just sort of follows it, you know, a little bit. And if we sort of speed up here, right, it's going to increase that distance until we slow down, it regains some control over its location. Sorry, that's the dog. And, you know, we're going to do some more stuff in order to clamp that a little bit. Because as you saw, like, if we get really fast, we sort of lose control And we obviously don't want this thing to be, you know, a mile away from the car like it is right here in this view. So we will work on that, but in the meantime, that is perfectly fine. And I don't know why I'm looking at that. Sorry about that. I just got distracted for a second. So now we're going to go back to our code, right? And we're just going to do one more line, as I said, for this thing, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to say transform.lookAt. And what this does is if we provided a vector, right, so, you know, a position in the world, so you can see here, right, if we give it a transform of the game object, so if we give it the game object's transform, we will actually be able to force our camera to just point directly towards that, and it'll handle all of the math on the back end. So you can see if I put in focus.transform, right, we are going to end up with a better result here in 1 second, and there you go. So you can see our camera will now focus on our vehicle, and it's kind of hard to tell that we're moving, but if you look at the car in the view, or in the viewfinder up above, you know, you'll be able to see that this is actually working in the scene. So there is that. It is definitely working just fine. And now we're just going to make a few changes. So actually, we don't even need to go into the script. What I want to do is come in here and just multiply this by our dampening factor. Right? So let's just do that. And then we can come back into our main script here, and we can come to our camera and just change this to like 0.5 so that we don't get such dramatic differences in the positions of both the camera and the car. You know, so we're not getting as much of a distance here, but it is still a little bit of a problem. And we'll go over how we can better resolve that in some later tutorials. But in the meantime, you can see that our camera is definitely working. But just slow the car down a little bit here. Right, you can see that it catches up nicely, and we end up focused. And actually, I just want to take a look at this and see if I can make these values a little bit better. Right, so I want to maybe decrease this height a little bit. I don't know why this is shaking so much. But yeah, so we're gonna go over some of that stuff in the later videos. But for now, right, that is for all intents and purposes good enough. And now we can just go into our car controller and make a few more changes. So first off, I think the car is going a little bit fast, so I'm going to decrease that. And the turn radius, I think that's okay for now. I'll have to look into actual steering radii for cars, you know, and steer angles, but for now we're just going to leave it at 20 degrees. Seems safe enough. So the last thing that I really want to do with this is, as I said at the beginning of this, to change our rigid body's location. Right? So we're going to say public transform, and then we're going to call this our CM for center of mass, and we'll add that as a required component here. So we're going to say required component. Actually, I'll just leave that. That's fine. I don't really think that that's going to be a necessity here. It's not as essential because I can just come in here and do this. So we can just put an if statement, right? And say if CM, right? So if it's been defined as something and it's not just a null like it is right now, we can say I feel like, okay, the car controller, that is one more thing that I should add here, is going to need, so required component type of, just continue typing along with me, it's going to need another rigid body, right? Or not another. It's going to require a rigid body, because if we want to even do the scripting, we need that. So we're going to say up here, right? Just add this down here. Public rigid body RB, right? And now up here we can say rb.getComponent, right? And we can get our rigid body and call that RB. And, or sorry, it's not rb.getComponent, it's RB equals getComponent rigid body. And now what we can do is we can reference that rigid body. We can say rb dot center of mass equals cm, right? And actually that's the position of cm, right? So now we have specified our center of mass, and I can probably demonstrate that right now. So if we go into our car, we have now this new little section down here, and we can add, first off, our rigid body, right? And then now under our car we can add another thing. We can add a game object, and we can call this our center of mass, right? And let's just go into our vehicle again. We can grab this and just place it under here as our center of mass of the vehicle. So for our vehicle, we want our center of mass to be pretty low, but at the same time not too low so as to be unrealistic. So like putting it here wouldn't be, and putting it there certainly wouldn't be either. But just to demonstrate, just in order to demonstrate that this thing is actually working, we're gonna put that out there and just show you, if we play this, it should flip backward, right? So there you go. Our center of mass is now ridiculously disproportionate for this vehicle. But as you can see, it's all working just fine. And now, as a consequence of that, if we just sort of reset this to our vehicle, and let's just first, before I get into that next point, improve the locational accuracy of this thing. Let's put it a little bit forward since the engine will be at the front. And I think that that's okay. I think that that's pretty realistic. So, yeah, that looks somewhat realistic. Looks okay. And as I was saying, as a consequence of this now, we can increase the size of our bounding box, because this will not in any way affect our car's mobility, right? And now if we run our script, we may see that our car flips because we have too much torque. Yeah, so you know, the center of mass may be a little bit too high, so I'm just going to drop it down. That's not realistic, right? Most cars have higher centers of mass, but I'm okay just putting this towards the bottom, just so that we don't have to deal with, you know, that whenever we try to accelerate and turn. But I suppose the best option is really just to decrease our maximum torque, or our strength coefficient here. Let's make that like 10,000. I forgot when I changed it in the script, it didn't actually affect our, you know, real value here, right? It didn't affect our active torque value, so that's a little bit much. We shouldn't be able to dance on our vehicle's sides, right, by just hopping back and forth between tilts. So we're just gonna reset that and run this thing again, and you can see we're turning as much as we can, and we're not disconnecting from the ground. We're not having any major issues. Now obviously if I continue to accelerate for too long, that's still going to be a problem, like right there. But again, we will remedy some of that in the next video. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I think this was probably actually about the same length as the last one, but I hope you learned something. And yeah, so I'm gonna go this time, so good luck to you in your endeavors. And yeah, don't actually, just one last thing, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and if you have a suggestion for a new video or a question about the present video or the series in general, please make sure to ask that in the comments, or state your queries in general. So yeah, bye.